Okay. So there have been a lot of responses. There has been a lot of responses to Washington Post journalist Philip Bump's appearance on Noam Dworman. He's the owner of the Comedy Cellars in New York, his podcast. And it was fodder for a lot of critics of media, especially to watch Bump have a very, very difficult time defending his stance that Hunter Biden doesn't go to Joe Biden. So anything that sort of affects Hunter Biden, there's not enough evidence suggesting that Joe Biden was implicated in wrongdoing to basically draw conclusions about the president. Dworman says as he opens the podcast, basically, I was looking for the smartest person who disagrees with me on Hunter Biden to come on and have a conversation. And basically, I want to learn what the other side is and the best version of the other side because I'm genuinely curious and want to see how it holds up to scrutiny. Well, if you accept this as an experiment to test that question, how well does the defense of Joe Biden basically hold up to scrutiny? The video didn't go so well for Philip Bump. So let's take a look at a quick clip from how it went.
What do you take from the text message to his adult daughter, Hunter's text message, I have to give 50% of my income to Pop?
I have no idea what that means. I don't. I have no idea what that means.
Well,
I know it's circumstantial evidence, and you prefer that.
No, what could it mean?
I have no idea.
But doesn't it?
I don't know.
Well,
I appreciate your.
Has anybody asked her?
I don't know. I don't know.
Don't you think somebody should ask her?
Okay. Like I'm not. I just said I don't know, and I don't know what to make of it, so I have nothing else to say about it.
Yeah,
what do you want me to say?
Yeah, but you say there's no evidence. But then there's a text message where he says, "I give Pop 50% of my money." That's evidence.
Okay. Well, okay, fine.
So
it's evidence. I appreciate you having me on.
It doesn't. That something like that. Who do you think is being more? I listen to that and I'm saying,
am I?
You can free to go.
I feel you want me to leave, like just walk out in the middle of this because that way you can
you can go.
Right.
Is this a standard? Really, this is the way the Washington Post handles people who disagree with them.
When I agree to be on for 45 minutes, and then
go.
I get on for an hour and 15.
Yeah, so that is at the end of the interview because Bump does get up and leave, but he had been there for some hour going back and forth with Noam Dworman. You can actually watch the interview. I think it's very interesting because Philip Bump repeatedly says that he's kind of debunked. He uses the phrase debunked this idea that Joe Biden is potentially implicated in Hunter's wrongdoing. Dworman there is referencing that text message from Hunter Biden to his daughter Naomi Biden that was found on his laptop, suggesting he had been siphoning, that his father had been getting money funneled to him from Hunter's work, and we know that his work was influence peddling essentially. So if you don't care about the Hunter Biden thing, I don't particularly blame you. I care about it because I like covering influence peddling. But what I want to get to the bottom of, whether it's on the left or the right, by the way, is what the real world serious consequences of the double standards in our politics are. And at this point, I am talking about left and right, although I think it's particularly a problem for the left because the left is largely in charge of the media, and the media does largely purport to be a neutral arbiter of a lot of these things. Philip Bump isn't out there saying, listen, I'm a partisan Democrat, so take my perspective with a grain of salt. He's not saying that, and I think that's a real problem. Let's put up the second element. This is a story that you may have also heard. I think Crystal and Sagar covered it, about this serious attempt to rein in corruption in Ukraine. So that's from Reuters. It says Ukraine lawmakers back anti-graft disclosure rule, but with loophole. I wonder how the loophole got there. There's a lot of money flowing in the United States and in Ukraine, as we all know. We basically understand that at this point. But what I just want to focus our attention on for a moment is something a lot of the media isn't talking about when it comes to Joe Biden and when it comes to Ukraine. If we go back to when Joe Biden had Ukraine in his portfolio during the Obama administration, there's a serious question of him being sent over to Ukraine to have these conversations with Viktor Shokin and whomever else is the prosecutor that Biden ended up firing, about corruption in a foreign country, when his own son is being paid tens of thousands of dollars a month, so like $80,000 a month, by Burisma, by a corrupt oil and gas company in Ukraine. So this is America taking their credibility and all of their aid money back in the Obama administration over to Ukraine and saying, you guys really got to clean up your corruption. The messenger for that really needed to clean up his own corruption, as even people in the State Department recognized when they realized what Hunter Biden was doing with the Biden family name back at the time. Fast forward to 2022, 2023, Joe Biden is overseeing millions and millions of dollars going over to Ukraine. And he is completely compromised. There's just no other question. There's no question about it, because even Philip Bump recognizes that what Hunter Biden did with the Joe Biden family name was wrong. And whether or not you think Joe Biden literally profited from any of that, whether or not you think he's been honest, et cetera, it is absolutely, no questions asked, affecting the moral credibility of the United States as they say, hey, let's put a pause on some of this corruption. This is hard-earned American taxpayer dollars. We're giving it to you to fight this war effort. We need to make sure that it's going to the right places. Our moral credibility is absolutely hampered by the reality that the Biden family name was being used to peddle influence for the last decade, essentially. Now, this goes in both directions. We can talk about Jared Kushner, for instance. You get to a place where basically the left has no credibility on Jared Kushner. There's some serious problems there. People on the left who don't care about Hunter but care about Jared, which I would argue is most of the left, is in a huge credibility deficit once again. And I get that they'll say, why should we talk about Jared? Or I get why people on the right would say, why should we talk about Jared when it came to Hunter, you had 2020, in 2020, the intelligence community, you had top Democrats, you had big tech rallying in this concerted effort to censor information about it. I get why conservatives don't want to touch the Jared stuff. But once again, if you are implicated in influence peddling, as Jared Kushner has been when it comes to Saudi Arabia, leaving the Trump administration with Saudi Arabia in his portfolio and then getting a massive influx of investment money from Saudi Arabia, from the Saudi investment bank, then yeah, you're in a huge credibility problem once again. And let's put up the next element, because this is another serious consequence of double standards. This is a New York Times headline, and if you're listening to this, I wish you could see the picture. It's a juxtaposition of Dianne Feinstein and Mitch McConnell. The New York Times asks, reluctant to retire, leaders raise a tough question. How old is too old? Once again, a consequence of the double standard is that the left has no credibility saying that Mitch McConnell needs to retire, which, by the way, Mitch McConnell absolutely needs to retire. And the right loses credibility, although most people on the right are not defending Mitch McConnell. As we talked about earlier in the show, most people on the right are eager for Mitch McConnell to go, but defenders of Mitch McConnell lose their credibility on Joe Biden and on Dianne Feinstein if they are defending Mitch McConnell or not saying anything about Mitch McConnell. What is the consequence of all of this? That's the central point I want to make. This is not just a media plaything. It is not a political football that we just punt around to what about Jared Kushner? What about Hunter Biden? What about Mitch McConnell? What about Dianne Feinstein? This is a political football that's way too often treated like it's part of a game here in Washington, D.C., but there are actual serious consequences to it, which is that in a normal circumstance, you would look at Joe Biden and say it is abundantly clear this man should not be running for a second term as president. He wandered out of a Medal of Honor ceremony just yesterday in a painful way. It happens every week, seemingly every day. There's a moment that is just cringeworthy, and you feel badly for the man because perhaps you see some of your own relatives in him. We've all watched this happen before, and it's sad. It belongs nowhere near the presidency. And in a normal media atmosphere, in a normal political discourse, we would know that, we would understand it, and we would be able to have somebody, whether they're Democrat or Republican, who's at least more competent and able to have conversations with world leaders that they understand, is able to be trusted when they're negotiating with world leaders that, okay, I believe Joe Biden heard me and understood me, and whatever we're working on, that'll be just fine. Same thing with Dianne Feinstein, who's been in Senate leadership for forever, Mitch McConnell, who is Senate leadership for Republicans. It's a real problem for the United States, both how we're negotiating with Ukraine and negotiating with Saudi Arabia, that we lack credibility on those two fronts. So all of this is just to point out that it's easy to do the what about thing, and I actually believe that there are some legitimate circumstances to do it because, again, what about Hunter Biden when people are bringing up Jared Kushner and you had all this massive concerted effort to block out some information on him? I get it, but I just wanted to pause for a moment as we kick around these things like political footballs and realize that the double standards, I think, largely fueled by the media, fueled by people like Philip Bump. This hypocrisy actually it may not have real world consequences for reporters in Washington, D.C. who have comfy lives, but it does have consequences for the country in the near term and in the long term. Ryan, it's just frustrating.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.